The anime has been keeping secrets from you, hiding away unique Pokemon outside of your reach. In their world, they not only have the famous Crystal Onix, a Pokemon long suspected to be a regional variant, but they also have Mimikins, the truly dead ghost Pokemon, Snorlax Snowmen, who harness the power of ice, the prototype that is Porygon Zero, and many more. With the help of Professor Ivy, I've been able to travel to each of these unique lands and learn about what makes all of these Pokemon so special. Also, I can bring to you the regional variants of the Pokemon anime. Hi there, I'm Curlick, and believe it or not, you guys were the ones that voted on this topic. If you missed the vote, keep your eyes out for the posts and maybe even the streams of this channel. But we'll simply work our way through the Pokemon I've found with the help of Bulbapedia and dig into their stories and maybe find out some science behind some of them. We'll talk about more than just regional variants, but also Pokemon that are unique to the anime itself. So let's begin with one that I love mentioning every single time I do talk about ghost Pokemon, being Mimikins, who is a shiny Mimikyu that is under the care of Acerola, which is strange to say out loud because how do you care for a ghost Pokemon? And I don't mean that in the sense of ghost type Pokemon, I mean an actual ghost Pokemon, because Mimikins is a tried and true actual deceased Mimikyu. It first appears in Sun and Moon episode 73, title of the episode, Why Not Give Me a Z-Ring? It typically just freely floats around, joining Acerola as it phases through objects like our typical ghosts would, supernatural or not. But when a Gengar is causing trouble, Mimikins moves in to try and stop the troublemaker. The only problem here, though, is that when it tries to use its move Shadow Claw, as it did when it was assumedly alive, it proceeds to fail, going straight through Gengar. Meanwhile, Acerola herself is able to jump on the back of Gengar, making physical contact with it at one point. So it's not like Gengar is just phasing through the attacks themselves of its own volition. Mimikins is truly unable to actually make physical contact with something that is living. I gotta look back at my Gengar shrine and actually ask, are any of them technically living? And the answer is yes. At least in the Pokemon Adventures manga, they are shown to be born from noxious fumes created by humanity and even consume them as a delicious treat if they're not eating your dreams or sucking away your life force. But back to Mimikins, what I assume this means is that Pokemon continue to have their same powers and energy even after they pass away, but they are true ghosts now, which means that their attacks won't ever work on the living. And this reminds me of the old Shoutout short, in which we see something pretending to be a butler and a giant hunter. It doesn't really match the ideas of what a butler would do, such as sitting at the head of the table. It also casts illusions of food, scares away Cheryl and her Chansey, but at no real point does it seem to actually make physical contact with them that actually does harm. Even though there's a huge, terrifying moment where it completely envelops them at one point, they don't seem to be significantly damaged by that. And while that is part of a YouTube mini-series, I thoroughly believe that it grants us proper insight into what helps us explain the strange phenomena of ghosts and ghost-type Pokemon, especially since the Pokemon Generations miniseries was meant to portray the games as they could be seen in that world for what they really are. I've also spoken on this before, but when you look at ghost types, the majority of them are not actual ghosts. The Ghastly line, as I stated, is composed of toxic fumes that solidifies, or there are ghost Pokemon that simply have power over spiritual essence, like the Senzu-style Oricorio. We start getting closer to actual ghosts when we discuss Pokemon like Shuppet or Mischievous, who feed on negative emotions, but even then, they're still living creatures that require a form of sustenance in order to continue existing. So by these standards, ghost-type Pokemon can all pass away just as any other Pokemon can. At least, that's the assumption that we can make, and I am positive there are exceptions to this rule. But at least with Mimikyu, it is then explicitly stated through the anime that they, in fact, can pass away, which is actually incredibly sad when we consider the idea of a Mimikyu's life. They can't show who they really are, and even if they did, the people who see them for their true form will just die. Rumors spread around them or about them, which ends up creating fear, and so their only choice then is to disguise themselves as someone incredibly popular just for the chance at love and affection. Personally speaking, of course, Mimikyu has been one of my top favorites since I had first seen it, so I would immediately just absolutely hug one if given the chance. I mean, I even have Mimikyu right behind me right now. But let's move on, because within Pikachu Valley, we find a massive Pikachu that reside together in their own paradise. They gather together and live their lives, even speaking their own Pika Speak, as it's called. You get a Pika Speak name when you visit, and within the anime, you'll find a ridiculous number of Pikachu with different hairstyles. One even has black cheeks, which is said to be an error, but still, it caught me off guard when I first saw it. Now, we've got a bowl cut, mohawks, full hawks, bangs of all kinds, afros, eyelashes for the ladies. And then there are 3 in particular that take the stage in the episode, as we meet a lady by the name of Pikala, who is their trainer, and it would be an understatement to say that she loves or even is obsessed with Pikachu. She's actually the creator in some capacity of this Pika Speak. She dresses up in different Pikachu outfits, puts Pika into all of her sentences, which is why it's called Pika Speak, and can tell what region a Pikachu is from just by nuzzling her face against the fur. I just imagine her taking the animal, the poor Pikachu, and just shoving her face into it, just taking a big whiff, and just the eyes dilate, and she goes, yeah, that one's from Kanto. I gotta commend the dedication. Everyone has their thing after all. But first, we have Bolt to speak of, who appeared first in the Battle Royal 151 episode, where he was used in the Manalo Conference. He interrupted a battle between a trainer's Magikarp and another trainer's Pyukumuku, attacking Magikarp and knocking it out. Soon after, Bolt was defeated with a single Shadow Ball from Jesse's Mimikyu. Curly received her nickname as the second Pikachu under Pikala's care due to her curly bangs. In Japanese, instead, it's because her hair resembles chestnuts. Curly was actually the first of Pikala's Pikachu to approach Ash's Pikachu and act friendly with him, much to Boss's dismay, who we'll get to in a moment. She and the other Pikachu were eventually later caught by Team Rocket and then were saved by Boss's Catastro Pika. I'm sorry. Catastro what now? Apparently that is directly translated as the Z move Certain Kill Pikachu, an upgraded version of Volt's Tackle, which is very surprising because that's one of the very few times that the word kill is directly used, and is one of a couple of different times that I believe that the word kill is used within a Pokemon's move. Speaking of Boss though, he is highly regarded amongst the other Pikachu in Pikachu Valley and appears to be Pikala's main battling Pokemon. In a Plethora Pikachu episode, upon seeing Curly act friendly with Ash's Pikachu, the boss became jealous and fired bolts of electricity at Ash's Pikachu. The 2 Pikachu then engaged in battle, which the boss lost, causing him to gain respect for Ash's Pikachu. I feel like I've said Pikachu so many times that I am forgetting that it's even a word or a made-up word. Either way, as a side, this did lead me down a small rabbit hole looking at Z moves, and I found out apparently the direct translation of Mimikyu's Let's Snuggle Forever move is called Bip Bop Friends Time. Which, that gets me right in the gut. Just imagine that just someone screaming that at you. Bip Bop Friend Time! That's terrifying. That's terrifying and hilarious all the same. And the first time I heard it, I almost died double over laughing because it's so ridiculous. But ultimately, these are just more Pikachu with more hairstyles, as though we don't already have, I don't know, how many different versions of Pikachu do we have? 16 in the mainline games, it turns out, with all of its different costumes. Not as many as I thought, but I guess while these aren't excessively unique, going back to our Pikachu Valley Pikachu and all their haircuts, it is still fun to see Pokemon in general with different hairstyles or breeds or anything else along those lines. Maybe we'll see that in Furfru with ZA, as I'm actually recording this a couple of hours after the 7/22 Pokemon Presents and Mega Dragonite. Fantastic. But moving right along, the original Magearna is actually only available in Pokemon Home after you complete the Pokédex. And of course, it is otherwise an anime-only movie variant. if it weren't such a unique Pokemon, I wouldn't be covering it here, as I'm not even covering the shiny legendary beast from the Zoroark movie, as they don't have any additional story to tell that is definitive. I used to think that they were from a different timeline, thanks to Celebi being there, but that is unsupported by nothing more than speculation. But back to Magearna, this original form is exactly that, the form in which it was originally created, full of color and unaged by the weathering of time. There's a lot of mystery behind this rabbit maid, and apparently Volcanion is the only one to really know of its past that is still living. We know it's an artificial Pokemon created by a scientist as a gift to royalty, specifically the king's daughter, 500 years ago. The soul heart in its chest is an artificial soul that was created by the scientist by collecting life energy from other Pokemon. Due to Magearna's ability to feel others' pain, it will try as hard as it can to save injured Pokemon, and it can perceive the emotions, thoughts, or feelings of other Pokemon as well. So, the transformation from the original color to what we see nowadays is nothing more than the fading of color due to weathering or oxidation, as you would expect. But what makes me incredibly curious is the idea of its soul heart, because it just reminds me of the ultimate weapon created by AZ. And if you're like me and consider the soul heart to have been harnessed in the same capacity, then we effectively have the Philosopher's Stone of Pokemon, a seemingly infinite source of energy that exists at the sacrifice of others. It just has an immense amount of energy that is stored in one tiny little area, and it's not actually infinite. It's still taking from someone or something else. But I won't go on about that here. Maybe I'll have to set up a video one day about all the artificially created Pokemon and their implications one day. Lillie the Nihilego is another technicality here, but it's one that I find significant enough to talk about that I wanted to include in this video. My reasoning is because it is through this Nihilego that was with her father, Mon, that we found out so much more about the personality of the Nihilego itself. This shiny Nihilego was the one to save Mon once he fell through the Ultra Wormhole and initially lost his memories. The same Mon that is the lost husband of Lusamine and the one that we find in the games residing on Pokepelago. And sadly, the one that, if I remember properly, Lusamine reunited with and let go within the games. It seems as though she didn't want to drag him back into the corporation after everything that had happened to her dear husband and everything revolving around the corporation itself. But within the anime, they are reunited and they learn the story of this special Nihilego and Mon. Because not only did it save Mon, but it then also used its powers to make him see it as Lillie, and proceeded to live with him in a remote house for years. To avoid him from regaining his memories and leaving it, she, or it's, this Nihilego, Lillie, removed all the mirrors in the house and dirtied the windows, preventing him from even seeing his own reflection, which, how do you go years without seeing your own reflection or looking out the windows or even keeping such a close eye on someone that they never clean these surfaces in the first place? I'd honestly start thinking that I was a vampire at some point and my curiosity would take over and I'd walk into the sun and eat garlic on purpose just to find out if I was one. Honestly, I swear my ancestors were probably the guinea pigs that were forced to eat random mushrooms and berries and figure out which ones were poisonous and which ones weren't, and yet somehow my bloodline persisted to this day. Unlike most Nihilego in the anime, this Nihilego, Lillie, is shown to be very caring, as seen when it rescued Mon and took care of him during the time that they lived in Galar. It is also shown to be very protective, being ready to attack Lillie and Lusamine when it felt that they were trying to separate it from Mon. Lillie is also shown to have a lonely nature, as it didn't want Mon to regain his memories, fearing that Mon would abandon it if he did. This is all groundbreaking in terms of the Nihilego species, because originally most people attributed them to be a creature that was nothing more than an uncaring parasite that will attack and defend its host as they pump them full of the neurotoxin they produce in order to create negative emotions for them to consume. And yes, that is how they function. The neurotoxin releases your inhibitions, you feel excitement and pleasure to some capacity, but you act on your anxiety and depression, which only increases further because of Nihilego. These negative emotions are the key food source for its species, who then consumes it. And this is why Lusamine acted the way that she did, becoming worse and worse after the disappearance of her husband Mon. But now we see through this shiny Nihilego that it is not inherently evil. It is just as any other living creature is or acts, and has more emotions than just hunger and destruction. And to put a nice little bow on that, this Nihilego does continue to live happily with the family after their reunion. Valencia Island is located in the southern, or rather southwestern region of the Orange Islands. This is also the home of Professor Ivy and her extensive lab in which she studies the physiology of Pokemon. She has been accredited for her incredible intelligence and has a report on Pokemon adaptive variation as a function of regional distribution, which is probably as properly scientific as anything gets within Pokemon, and allow me to explain what the heck that even means in layman's terms. This means that the more widely distributed Pokemon are, the more they have adapted in various ways in order to better survive within their new environments. And of course, this is something that can be studied extensively in the games, let alone what we know of this in the real world. We're really talking some Darwin's Finches situation here through Professor Ivy. And through the National Institute of Health, the role of natural selection in the evolution of adaptive phenotypes has undergone constant probing by evolutionary biologists, employing both theoretical and empirical approaches. As Darwin noted, natural selection can act together with other processes, including random changes in the frequencies of phenotypic differences that are not under strong selection, and changes in the environment which may reflect evolutionary changes in the organisms themselves. Once again, layman's terms, please. Natural selection, paired with your genetics and the environment in which you exist, will help tell us why you are the way you are physically, behaviorally, and so on, how you have adapted. And this is what Professor Ivy is looking into, especially as we look at the Pokemon we find on Valencia Island. The things to note are the various different colors of Pokemon we find here that are not shiny Pokemon and do vary from what we are used to. From orange Butterfree to more saturated Nidoran, Vileplume, and Paris with different circular rings on them rather than the usual spots, or deeper shades of orange for Pokemon such as Weepinbell. Can we find explanations for these Pokemon? Why are the way that they are? Well, as much as I would love to pull my theoretical science and whip up some deep scientific lore, the islands are literally called the Orange Islands, this one specifically being Dai, or Bitter Orange Island, instead of Valencia. And what do we see here? A lot of burnt oranges, or deeper orange colors, for the Pokemon that are present here. Though at least I can say this, the Orange Islands as a whole seem to be set within a tropical climate. There are even Officer Jennies and Nurse Joys who have tans. As such, it becomes pretty clear that both people and Pokemon here produce more melanin within their bodies, resulting in darker skin, darker hair, you name it, all because they have more sunlight. I can't quite figure out why there's different patterns on some of these Pokemon, but it is what it is. Maybe these patterns help reflect more sunlight or absorb less sunlight, whatever it is. And maybe if we just kind of drop an Execute here, we might end up with its Alolan form of Executor. There are plenty of these islands with lots of water and tons of sunlight, so I'd say that's pretty possible. Same thing goes for Alolan Raichu, since we do find them naturally within Pokemon Snap within the Lental region, so why not? Also, Pokemon Snap ecology coming soon. The big one everyone thinks about when they think of a regional variant that we are missing out on, and that is the Crystal Onix. It appears in an episode entirely dedicated to it as the focus within Sunburst Island of the Orange Islands. Besides being made of crystal, the Crystal Onix is also unique from other Onix in that it can live in water without being hurt by it. The cave it resides in is also full of the same crystals that we assume make up its body. It has a special resistance to water type attacks, which is realized when water is used as an attack on it, which it doesn't even close its eyes. It no-sells that attack in the anime. Though its body is still tough enough to one-shot strike a Cloyster with like a tackle or headbutt, whatever was going on there. And its rock throw moves have even transformed to match its own composition. Eventually, Charmeleon's fire attacks are used on it instead, which was super effective, of course. Immediately following this, its body flares a bright red, the crystals reflecting the heat of the fire and inspiring our character of the day in what I feel is way overly dramatic, as I felt like I was going through some sort of wormhole warp drive while watching it. So to make that incredibly clear, this is not a normal Onix, as it has new resistances and new weaknesses, with it being resistant to water and weak to fire, maybe even at its ability to swim so easily, and we simply have an ice-type Onix. But why would this even happen? Well, imagine being an Onix in these areas, in this setting of islands. It doesn't exactly matter how it got here, but let's assume an Onix dug through the ground deep below the bottom of the ocean and opened a hole above it, putting it in a terrible situation. And now, every move it makes causes or may cause the very real chance of death. Let's take the case of Vulpix, who adapted to the cold as it changed from a fire type into an ice type in order to better thrive in Alola, or even Cubone, who was faced with the incredibly harsh Alolan lands and was forced to evolve into a regional Marowak fit to be able to defend itself from a great number of grass types or even water types, as its flames are said to not even be able to be extinguished by water. These Pokemon adapted to their environments, completely changed their typings and physical characteristics, and even their behaviors in dramatic fashion. So our Orange Island's variant Onix has done the same in order to survive. In fact, this Onix is shown to even be an incredible swimmer, and even if we don't have a proper Pokédex entry of it, I'd like to think it would be similar to the following split among the different versions of information that we'd get between two games. The rolling tides of the Orange Islands were harsh on Onix, and after consuming sea glass, its body has transformed to reflect its diet of crystals. Who knows, maybe even those crystals could be salt crystals for all we know, and it was consuming those. Either way, I'd love to see this Onix come to life in a future region still, especially as we have seen other Pokemon receive variants based on old Dex entries or the anime, such as when we get to see Mega Gyarados, who is very strikingly similar to the unnamed legendary water Pokemon. Pinkan Island is a natural wildlife preserve which also exists in the Orange Islands. A lot of these are from the Orange Islands. Its name, though, comes from a special fruit that grows on the island which turns Pokemon into this pinkish color. Its pink Pokemon are highly sought after by poachers, so people are not allowed on this island, and anyone caught on it is immediately confronted by Officer Jenny. Now, research scientists and other rangers also live on the island to study the rare Pokemon, but the location is deliberately kept a secret to avoid outside interference. As such, its Pokemon tend to be hostile towards humans, which is a little bit strange now that I think about it. That would imply that these Pokemon are very defensive. They've had predators here, which is very much possible, because when we look at certain animals that exist, if you've never had a predator, if you've never had a reason to fight back or anything along those lines, you probably won't attack another creature no matter how strange they may be. Which, I think it's an animal called the Kowaka, which is very much that way. They've apparently never had a predator, so they're just super friendly. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But Pinkan Island also has natural defenses and is surrounded by giant whirlpools. Its sheer cliffs are the only way onto the island, and there are just a handful of buildings there that people who help Officer Jenny are able to stay in. So it makes it pretty hard to even get there, to stay there, to survive there, and anybody who just shows up is going to get found out pretty quickly and get kicked out. Now, the special fruit found here is the Pinkan Berry, which has special properties as it will turn any Pokemon that eats it pink. Though it seems as though that this has to be the Pokemon's primary diet, or at least that they're eating it often enough, which will then cause the color change to be permanent. However, if only eaten a few times, the Pokemon will soon revert back to its normal coloration. For example, Ash's Pikachu ate the berries, and just the tip of its tail and its cheeks turned pink rather than its whole body. Now, as we look at the list of Pokemon here, we can find a very simple explanation for this, and that is the fruit is just metabolized with whatever natural chemical is found within it, and that chemical or nutrient is then reflected through the pigments that their bodies produce. this is actually entirely possible in real life as well, as we can find carotenoids, which are found in a slew of things such as carrots, spinach, kale, and sweet potatoes, or lycopene, which is found in tomatoes, turmeric, and even beets, can all cause a change to one's color through excess consumption. What we can assume here then is that the anime just wanted to speed up the process, and we have a very similar natural chemical in effect, which is really cool. I love the strawberry pink color of these Pokemon, and it's just fun to see happen. And as a fun bit of extra information that I love to share, there are two creatures that gain their unique colors through metabolism in real life, through even potentially dyeing their own bodies for one of them. In the case of dragonflies, I had remembered or thought for the longest time that it was just metabolism that would help them maintain their coloration. But it turns out the vibrant colors are maintained through oxidation reduction, redox. And hopefully that doesn't send too many of you back to high school chemistry class with that one. But through this reaction, they're able to make it clear whether they're searching for a mate or not, or whether they are mature or not, allowing the immature dragonflies to not be seen as a threat and avoid being speared by the horn of aggressive males. In addition, when they do pass away, all the color in their body is no longer being maintained by these reactions, and they do fade away, as we would see in museums. Alternatively, we have the bearded vulture, who will actively apply the red soil of the lands in which it lives in to its feathers in order to take on a more reddish hue. That itself is pretty cool, and it's one of my favorite birds. And were it not for the metabolism of the Pokemon themselves, back to Pokemon, allowing them to turn pink, it would make sense to also see the pink Pidgey applying the proteins of the fruits to their feathers whenever they preen themselves. None of them are true regional variants here, but it would still be fun to run into in the games one day. We have a bunch of Vivillon variants after all, so let's get a bunch more color variants for other Pokemon. The Snowman Snowlax is a bit odd, admittedly, even for a Pokemon filler episode as I see it, and at least I understand it to be a filler episode, since this is part of the Pikachu shorts, in which Pikachu adventures off on its own or with other Pokemon without Ash and the gang. In the case of the Snorlax Snowman episode, which is part 2 of the Pikachu's Winter Vacation, Pikachu, as part of a group of Pokemon, build a whole Snorlax together out of snow. The Snorlax is very accurate to an actual Snorlax, just kind of sitting around, and after resting, they find that same Snorlax now looking through their window, which is a bit creepy, I have to admit, especially when it's kind of like waving and then walks away as to attract them to follow it. And they all do go on a grand adventure chasing after it. Psyduck rolls down the hill even, and once they catch up to the Snorlax, it points at an apple for them to help it eat, before the collective weight of them all, primarily Snorlax probably, snaps the cliff edge that they're on, and they sled with the Snorlax over the ground, landing on a block of ice, which is then also snapped off from the mainland, and they float off to sea. Real comedy of errors going on here. Now they get to view some beautiful aurora lights, the Snorlax freezes, the whirlpool sucking them in, which then also results in them being in the center of the frozen whirlpool, with the sea life all around them just vibing as if it's just one big aquarium, and it's very pretty. But you do, again, get to see that Snorlax use Blizzard. And they then create a ship of ice, Titanic eat your heart out with how ironic that is, and as it eventually melts, two Lapras just suddenly appear and save the group, leading them to the promised land of many snowy Snorlax Snowmen. And then eventually, the party returns home and go back to sleep. Though upon waking up, the group of Pokemon look at each other, nod, and race to make sure they didn't just collectively dream up their entire adventure, only to find the original Snowman Snorlax not running around or alive, exactly where they had originally built it. As a side, I will say, while searching for this episode so I could really understand what happened rather than just read about it, I came across Pikachu's rescue adventure, and it unlocked my core memory of watching an Elekid save a nest of Execute in their tree from being blown away during a massive storm. And in fact, the entire team kind of just jumped up the tree to save nest after nest, and I always thought that that was part of a movie, but it wasn't, and it was just nice to actually find out where that memory came from. But back to Snorlax, overall it's plain and simple that this Snorlax is definitively part ice as well, if not completely, ice. I only say part ice because the sheer weight it had Plus, the Snorlax still had a pink tongue inside of its mouth. Does any of that really mean anything? No, but I think a normal ice Pokemon would be interesting. A normal/ice type, and let him keep the thick fat ability while you're at it, just to balance out that new allergy to fighting type moves by allowing it to not have such a strong weakness to fire types and just have fun with this Pokemon. One Pokemon I know I needed to include is the purple Kecleon we find in the anime and the Mystery Dungeon games. It has appeared in the Kecleon Caper episode as a TCG card, and one of the Kecleon Shop brothers we find within Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Honestly, the only big thing to note here is that this purple coloration is not its shiny color. Rather, the shiny has a deeper yellow hue for its crest color, kind of orange in some capacity, a blue tongue, and a blue stripe. Even then, it seems like that deeper yellow color isn't really present in the 3D models, which admittedly, some of those 3D models have a bit of a faded color compared to their past models, their 2D versions. Not a lot to really talk about here, so how about I share some cool information about chameleons real quick, just to make it worthwhile. As from BBC, I bring you the following. The original theory as to why chameleons look so strange is because they were made by the devil from spare parts. The skin of a crocodile, the tongue of a toad, the horn of a rhino, and eyes from nobody really knows what. And for our other fun fact, most of the time it is folded up like an accordion within its mouth, its tongue. But when a meal passes by, the chameleon contracts its tongue muscles, just like pulling back the string of a bow, and fires its tongue forward like a rocket-powered harpoon, reaching its prey in 20 milliseconds. Scientists call this adaptation elastic recall. If it were a car, the chameleon's tongue could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1/100th of a second. It's the highest acceleration and power output of all reptiles, birds, and mammals that we know of, at least. And before we move on, because I'm having fun with this, I do want to say thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this so far, I have tons of multi-hour deep dives and ecology videos about the Pokemon world, connecting our world to theirs. So make sure you subscribe and even leave a comment talking about your favorite small moment from the anime that might be a core memory for you. I love reading the comments when I'm not working, and both comments and watch time are the best way for a video's reach to be boosted and the channel's reach to be boosted, as stated by YouTube directly. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member on here or Patreon for as little as $3 a month and get perks such as behind the scenes info, updates, and hearing your name shouted out at the end of every video. But once again, thank you, and on with the video. Aging Pokemon are a toss-up because I believe there are claims that Pokemon age in the games, but we don't really get to see that to my knowledge. In the anime, we get a slew of Pokemon that age, and their aging is separate from their evolution entirely, which is something that I love. I've wanted to complete a video on this idea for a while, but it's just not long enough to even have an hour of content just for it alone, so let's just dig into it here. These are anime-exclusive Pokemon in some capacity, after all. The greatest case of aging that you might know of is in the case of Puka, or one other one we'll talk about later, who is an old Pikachu that appears in the Pikahuna episode, even appearing younger in a flashback, which that flashback was 20 years ago when Puka first met our character of the week, Victor, who had attempted to conquer a giant wave called Humunga Dunga. Puka had arrived on a raft from an unknown place, but now the two of them work as a team. Puka had the ability to sense the waves, emitting a bluish glow whenever a big wave approached, and it helped the two conquer many big waves on the island, with Humunga Dunga being the only one that they have yet to conquer. Can I continue saying Humunga Dunga without laughing or smiling? Let's find out. But by the end of the episode, they do complete their goal. But when we look at Puka, to kind of focus on this Pikachu more, he has these incredible blue, almost human-like eyes, I feel like. Those eyes stay the same besides the visible crow's feet and ruffled fur we otherwise get to see as it does age, which are just some classic forms of aging. Now, moving on to a different Pokemon, another fantastic example is Ash's own Lapras, who was caught as a young Lapras, but is eventually shown to have matured over the course of time in later episodes. Or even Tracy's Scyther, who seems to have somehow grown a bit of weird hair on the side of its face somehow, which is supposed to make it seem elderly. It turns out, though, that praying manti, or mantises, are covered in a variety of sensory structures known as sensilla, which are tiny hair-like projections that detect different stimuli. And I feel a tiny bit dumb since I kind of, when you think of other insects or arachnids, they might have hair-like projections, like tarantulas, which, you don't bat much of an eye at, and I just never imagined a praying mantis with these hair-like projections at all. So, Elder Scyther having that hair is not as ridiculous as it actually seems. The list of aged Pokemon kind of go on and on, from the baby Lugia seen in the Mystery is History to the elderly Bellsprout in Pikachu's Summer Festival, but I would be doing you a massive disservice if I didn't close out this section with another incredibly important case of elderly Pokemon, and arguably one of the saddest ones in my personal opinion. Appearing in That's Why the Litten is a Scamp, we have an elderly Stoutland that was taking care of a wild Litten who would eventually become another one of Ash's Pokemon during his time in Alola. The whole episode is basically understanding why Litten decides to steal Ash's entire sandwich and even attack him, even though Ash offers some of his sandwich to this Litten. The Litten attacks Ash's face, it escapes Pikachu's electric attack, donkey kicks Rotom, all just to be bullied by an Alolan Persian that tricks Litten into burning up the sandwich that he stole completely. And that Litten is eventually seen begging for food, an Oran Berry, that it then brings to the elderly Stoutland, who is overgrown with fur, sitting on a couch, unmoving, and he tries to deny this Litten's gift of the berry, but eventually does eat it. The Stoutland seems to mentor Litten, training him to be stronger, all because, as shown in Litten's dream, the Stoutland had saved Litten from those that attacked it. Though that dream turns back into a nightmare, a premonition of elderly Stoutland passing away and Litten fearing being all alone. Ash saves Litten in another day from being attacked by the Alolan Persian as it is cornered at the edge of a cliff. He then carries the stubborn Litten to be treated at the Pokemon Center, and despite Litten being very aggressive and defensive, Ash continues to compliment and care for Litten in the best way that he can. Eventually, Litten tries to leave at night, still wounded, ignoring the fact that it needs time to heal, Ash doing the same really, as Ash decides to follow Litten and meet the elderly Stoutland, learning all about their relationship and why Litten had been acting the way it had been, how it had been such a scamp, as they put it. And instead of catching this adorable cat, Ash offers to revisit in the future to say, yeah, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll help care for you guys. I'll bring some extra food next time, give you guys some company. Only for the Alolan Persian to return, Ash to take another blast from a Pokemon like the champ that he is, and Litten eventually does chase the petty Persian away. In a future episode, the Stoutland is even shown teaching Litten how to use Fire Fang, which it does naturally learn, and there's a point in the episode where Kukui is looking at these two, and it's like, oh yeah, look at the way that they arch their back. The power is coalesced there, and that's how they're able to do this move, oddly enough. And it's incredibly rare to have two different species of Pokemon working on the same move together and cooperating the way that they do. And it is also shown more and more just how sick Stoutland is. Think about it. In the games, an Oran Berry is used to restore your health, and later on, Litten is trying to get a citrus berry to this same Stoutland. And it does get pretty sad, like I stated earlier, as Stoutland even begins to struggle breathing at one point. Like, it gets weirdly realistic in some capacity, and Ash does his best, barely able to carry Stoutland, and unfortunately, while he does make it and does succeed in carrying this Stoutland to a Pokemon Center, we see it hooked up to an IV bag and everything, the monitor going, all within the Pokemon Center. And you can just barely, I had headphones on and I could just barely hear Nurse Joy explaining to Ash that this Pokemon, this elderly Stoutland, isn't hurt. It isn't actually sick. It's just old. And how she believes Litten understands exactly what's happening. Litten and Stoutland escape at night before anyone else notices. They share a moment as Litten tries to prove its power once more, but in the middle of the night, when Litten is asleep, Stoutland passes away, disappearing completely and leaving Litten alone until Ash returns and is able to cheer Litten up, eventually catching Litten as it wants to be after a good battle. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that Meowth actually did play a part in this, being the, not liaison, but basically the translator between Pokemon and human, as even Meowth kind of just describes or talks about the idea of, yeah, you should talk about how you feel. Don't bottle it up. It's just going to make you angry and upset. Acrylic without the lab coat here, because I realized I failed to mention one important thing with this whole Litten thing. And there's this beautiful motif regarding the life, the death, grief, and all of that, right? Throughout the episode, you see a tree that is dying. There's leaves that slowly pick off of it over time, just from weather, just from aging, but it's also supposed to be representative of our big old boofer, of our big old dog, right? And when it finally disappears, the tree no longer has any leaves, or the actual couch is destroyed when Litten goes to check and see if, you know, his friend is there. And by the end of the episode, once Litten has kind of accepted everything that's going on, has gone through its moment of grief, is finally deciding to eat and everything, Litten finally sees the visage of our friend within the clouds themselves. And it's a, you know, it's kind of a goofy, you know, Mufasa moment all in all. But nevertheless, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, even if it's super brief, because, again, this goes to the idea of, this is a kid's show, but it has some really, really good elements of something that you're not going to recognize when you're a little kid. You're going to recognize it when, you know, you're older and it hits a little bit harder, or you're able to understand it better. And this whole story hit me right in the gut. I could feel my eyes wanting to tear up a little bit even just talking about it now, and I get it. It's a kid's show. But what they've done is what the most successful of cartoons has done. Create something that a child will be entertained by, while also giving a story that the parents can enjoy, who is likely watching the episode alongside their child. And as a small tangent, because we're on this topic, the golden card on my wall, right there, right? The number of people have asked me what the heck that is, and it's actually for one of my dogs that passed away in October of 2024. Chi-Chi was that dog, and my fiance, who was just my girlfriend at the time, who does not care about Pokemon, was very incredibly thoughtful and actually commissioned that card for me. So yeah, this whole story kind of hit me really hard. Yes, she's absolutely a keeper by all means. And we're gonna move on before I get a little too emotional here. I'm jumping all around the anime here, and I'm only a little bit sorry about it, but now we could talk about an episode that shows us the golden Sudowoodo in a modern day gold rush. You know, the era in which western towns were hunting down even the tiniest bit of gold as they panned for it in the rivers. Also, saying western is a little strong, considering, like, it was along the mountains and everything along those lines. You know, Mississippi River, I'm pretty sure, but I could be wrong. Either way, in the episode, we meet Keenan, who had created the golden Sudowoodo that they stumbled upon, or at least our party stumbled upon earlier in the day. It was flat out swimming in the lake, which is super strange, since usually Sudowoodo have major issues with getting wet in the first place, even by just rain droplets. And Keenan states how his might be a rock type, but it is strong against water type Pokemon now. I assume he just means that it is now resistant to water type moves rather than actually effective in the moves that it uses. But he does add that he has no idea how this happened, he is questioned a little bit further, but Brock does add in that since Onix evolves into Steelix, maybe the Sudowoodo was near a gold vein. But again, something is very wrong, as when they finally do catch up to this Sudowoodo, it hides behind Team Rocket, specifically behind Jessie, instead of allowing itself to get caught by Keenan, only for Jessie to be seriously hurt from getting hit by a Pokeball's capturing beam. So for anybody who might be questioning if humans can get caught in Pokeballs, no, but if you try, you'll hurt the other person, which makes it seem like they are a major just weapon. Turns out Keenan actually experimented on Sudowoodo, as he now admits as to why Sudowoodo might be scared of him, and through forcing it into a chamber, Sudowoodo was combined with some sort of gold, which blew up the container that it was in, scarring the Pokemon in his goal to help it overcome its fear and weakness of water. And after crazy hijinks, including Keenan holding back a Team Rocket mech to stall it from hurting Sudo, the day is eventually saved by the Pokemon with a brick break, and they return it to normal. Somehow, they just throw it back in the machine and call it a day. Reverse the goldification, the reverse of the King Midas touch, I guess. And realistically speaking, Brock was likely onto something, as it was likely turned into a Steel-type Pokemon through just infusing gold into its body. To be fair, also, Sudowoodo is a Pokemon I expect to have a third form one day, maybe through a glittering coat rather than a metal coat, just to accentuate the golden glitter that gold has, even though the episode is literally called All That Glitters Is Not Golden. Oops. Another short little entry we have here is the Mismagius that appears in an episode where Cynthia has a Rayquaza fighting against a Groudon who Ash is said to have to fight next in order to become the champion of the world, which seems absolutely wild, especially when you throw in that Brock is eventually swarmed by Jennies and Joys as he desires, and Dawn is in the final battle against her mother to attain the final ribbon in her competitions and become a world competition champion. All of it seems incredibly odd, doesn't it? Well, eventually, all these things just kind of get explained as Brock is poison jabbed by all the Joys and Jennies, waking him up and revealing that Krogunk was doing it to wake him up, as a Mismagius was the cause of these dreams in which all of their wishes were being granted. Now, back in Dream World, all their dreams reach a pinnacle of happiness until Brock comes in to reveal the trick at hand. Eventually, everything just starts to decay and wither, disappearing. Their badges rust away, and Mismagius laughs. And when the gang tries to escape, it just combines with Rayquaza in their dream. So this wasn't even something that happened in real life. It was all within a dream sequence. And this also kind of seems to make a lot of sense as to why the Pokédex entries mention the whole idea as to why people believe Mismagius will grant the dreams of others, to have people fall in love with them or even create massive nightmares for them. It's because Mismagius puts them into a dream and then just does whatever it wants, which, sure, the Rayquaza combination may have been the most powerful Pokemon revealed within the anime at the time, so it makes sense for Mismagius, in retaliation in creating a nightmare for its victims, to combine with that Pokemon. And the story essentially comes to a conclusion once they realize that Mismagius is just granting every wish without caring about what the wish is. So the gang's Pokemon become giant and powerful, and then absolutely destroy the Rayquaza, which I admit is pretty fun to see Piplup become giant and just beat the ever-loving crap out of a Rayquaza. It's like those videos where people do, oh, can you beat Pokemon Emerald with this Pokemon only, right? And then it's just a super buffed out Pokemon scaring the legendary in their thumbnail. Otherwise, nothing all that crazy when we actually watch the episode, but definitely fun. I was able to use Pokeflix, of course, and finally grab the Porygon episode. You know, the one. And I had never realized it was never even translated to English, which makes sense considering it was kind of removed from air and everything. So they weren't even going to send it to America or any other place for that matter. So I was blown back hearing their Japanese voice actors for the first time ever, but that's not what we're here for. Instead, we're here to talk about Porygon Zero, who ended up in the control of Team Rocket, resulting in a battle between the real Porygon and it. Their virtual battle allowing them to transform to perfectly counter each other again and again until they are assisted in defeating each other, clearing up the Pokeball virtual highway, and everyone, including Team Rocket, has to escape the virtual world before a system vaccine deletes the viruses that are in there and them, since they are also seen as intruder viruses. And I will not show the majority of this footage because, oh boy, there are way more flashing imagery and lights than just when Pikachu attacked Porygon. It's really, really rough. So I can understand why the entire episode was flat out banned thanks to this second half of it as a whole. The only explanation we really get regarding Porygon Zero is that it was the prototype in the creation of the true Porygon we are aware of. But imagine if instead we didn't have a Porygon 3. What if we just get Porygon Zero and it isn't a prototype? That's just my wishful thinking coming out, and also Porygon Zero just sounds cooler than Porygon 3. It's like the idea of going back to the primal basis of a creature that is fully digital and shouldn't have a primal beginning. Pokemopolis, G-Max Pokemon before they G-Max existed, but there's far more to it. Such as, at one point, the gang wondering if they worshipped a Psyduck based on a relic they find, only for Brock to say,
if they built a temple to honor Psyduck, they weren't hidden, they were lost.
Arceus almighty, Brock. They're already dead. You don't have to drop that bomb on them. The legend states that people there believed Pokemon were symbols of nature's power, and in addition, a stone tablet discovered nearby contains an ancient script that was deciphered by Eve, another character of the week for this episode. Beware the two powers of destruction. The Shadow of the Dark device will grapple with the prisoner of the unearthly urn. The sacred city will be no more as day is swallowed up by night. Darker still for you when they return to lay waste to the world. But no human knows the secret to soothe the powers and guide them back to the shadow world. Again, all that darkness really does sound a little bit like the darkest day. And of course, because everyone decides to mess with the relics further, those relics begin to glow, people are frozen in place, footprints start appearing like it's one big poltergeist hunting, other people are transported into these devices, and finally, the giant Gengar and eventually Alakazam appear with markings all over their bodies. Gengar summons a massive storm that could be seen incredibly far away, and no matter how much everyone tries, the Gengar cannot be stopped. That is until Eve is floating, the spoon artifact connects with the hourglass, and the massive Alakazam is released. You know what's worse than one giant evil Pokemon? Two giant evil Pokemon! And their battle begins, creating new artifacts, or growths on the land itself. Their beams of power spreading into the sky, all until Jigglypuff sings, summoning the giant Jigglypuff from its bell artifact. That bell is revealed to be its microphone of sorts of choice, which is honestly a little haunting when you listen to its song in such a deep voice. They're put to rest, giant Jigglypuff draws on them for being rude and falling asleep during its song, and they're all sealed away once more when everyone falls asleep. They hint at more mysteries to be uncovered around Pokemopolis, but of course we never hear anything about Pokemopolis ever again. Yet again, another example of anime-exclusive Pokemon that I guess are regional variants of a kind that we will never really get more information on. But let's not get too caught in the weeds here, and let's just move on. Before we get into the last bits of what we have more significance of in terms of lore or even science that we can speak on, we have a number of smaller entries that I just kind of want to group here and not waste a lot of time on. One such piece is that there are a number of Pokemon shown in the anime that have different patterns on their bodies. Little hearts appearing on Spinda, Bulbasaur, or even Wooper, for example. It's nothing all that special, but once again, we have a lot of different versions of the same Pokemon, such as Pikachu, who has different costumes, and I wouldn't be against, once more, special pattern Pokemon just being a thing. Though have fun catching the singular heart pattern Spinda and making sure that it's still shiny. I'm sure that wouldn't be a massive headache. In addition, within the anime, we see a slew of Smeargle with different colored tails. I've always assumed that this was based on their diets, but instead, apparently, they claim that their colored tails are just based on what their emotions are at the time, which, in terms of art, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They're a painter and are most often found in places where we find other artists gather, or even within some ruins of the Pokemon world, where we find the puzzles depicting the ancient fossils and Ho-Oh within Johto. There's the Green Gem Deoxys, which is just that, and Z2, who is another Zygarde core who just wanted to be blue in order to be kept visually separate from our other Zygarde core. And finally, Dwebble with different rocks for its shell. This makes a lot of sense when you think about it, considering that Dwebble is described as a Pokemon that will use its acid to dissolve away rocks or rock Pokemon such as Geodude in order to make a home for itself. By these standards, we could see Dwebble in a slew of different kinds of rock. Imagine, if you would, a Dwebble or even Crustle that lucked out and was able to make a home in large boulders left behind by glaciers long ago, a full granite shell rather than having sedimentary rock, or even a Dwebble with a shell of black glass obsidian, or one that accidentally finds itself spinning its acid on calcite, which then just dissolves rapidly in response to the acid as the chemicals interact with each other. Tons of possibilities, and I hope some of you geology students out there enjoyed the visuals of that. I know one person in the comments who definitely enjoyed me mentioning Crustle, at least. The Carbink Servants are a group of Pokemon serving Diancie, or Diancie, don't spear me for saying it a certain way, the princess of the Diamond Domain. 4 of them are named Merrick, Bort, Allotrope, and Dace. Merrick, Bort, and Allotrope first appeared in Diancie, Princess of the Diamond Domain. They have reappeared in Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction alongside the debut of Dace. I just cannot believe that one of them is called Bort. I can now only imagine Boruto as one of the Carbink now, even though I don't care or watch that show. The Carbink Servants are considered to be Diancie's bodyguards as they raised her when she was young. Out of the 4 Carbink, Dace was considered to be the most serious. Merrick, Bort, and Allotrope are very loyal to Diancie and are very dedicated to protecting her no matter what the situation is. The 3 are almost always seen escorting her wherever she goes, and also began to worry when she had fled from them to go to the big city. However, Merrick, Bort, and Allotrope can sometimes get annoyed with Diancie when she is oblivious to their situations, such as when they were panicking due to being chased by a group of Ariados, yet she told them to help Pangoro and greeted it. This is also seen when Diancie is playfully running from them, even though they had serious news for her. Just a big old ditz, a lovable ditz, if you would. Now, Merrick is capable of speaking telepathically and appears to be the leader servant of the 3. Bort and Allotrope, however, appear to be incapable of speaking telepathically, though the real focus of this whole group truly is Dace, who is shown to be quite knowledgeable, especially about the All-Earth Forest as well as the powers of Xerneas and Yveltal. It used this knowledge to advise Ash and his friends, and Diancie, while they were in the All-Earth Forest. It is shown to have given Diancie the objective to find Xerneas and its fairy aura. However, it is quite serious and was rather annoyed with Diancie when she took it lightly. It was also annoyed when Diancie replied to it with "Okie dokie," telling her that a simple yes is good enough. Dace even steps in to tell Diancie information, interrupting other Carbink, and even acts as an advisor of hers, which gives me really strong Alfred vibes. It was also the only main Carbink to not be turned to stone, as Yveltal's Oblivion Wing had missed, likely because it knew the attack was on the way. Now, when we look at their actual names from direct translation, we get Merrick, translated to Real Island or Genuine Island, Bort is Night, Allotrope is Joke, and Dace is Die, which is more of a sound or part of a word similar to, a letter, let's say. This makes perfect sense considering Die is also the first part of Diancie, Diamond, and considering that all Carbink have the chance to turn into a Diancie, Die here may be the closest to transforming into one. This would also explain why it's so keen to report information, to advise, to try and be the leader of all, because it's trying to assume its future role. This even visually makes sense, as the fluff around its body is the most developed or largest of all the Carbink that we see, being very visually similar to the skirt or dress we see on Diancie herself. That was far more layers than I originally knew about them from every single other time I've analyzed their relationship between the Pokemon of Carbink and its evolution or transformation rather into Diancie, but it's also subtle, not in your face right off the bat, and you can make these assumptions based on the facts that we do know. Again, going back to Carbink, are supposed to turn into Diancie. Our final entry for the day takes us back to Generation 1 with the cloned Pokemon, because while we all know about the fossilized eyelash from Mew that was supposed to create, or was used to create Mewtwo, there are a massive slew of Pokemon that are otherwise cloned and kept out of the games. This includes our original starter Pokemon and even the daughter of Mr. Fuji in the anime, Amber, who was cloned into Ambertwo, who at one point in the story shows the 3 starter clones in Mewtwo a memory of life, wind, sun, rain, and times of day. A world outside of the confines of the test tubes they exist in, outside of the chambers that they are effectively prisoners of. Because even when Mewtwo and Ambertwo first interacted, she states that she's never met another Pokemon or human that has these abilities, these psychic abilities, but that it doesn't really matter whether they're Pokemon or human. They're just interacting, communicating with each other. And that alone is something to be joyous about. Mewtwo asks Ambertwo if the moon is the sun, and he is told that the moon is there to keep people from being afraid of the dark. Soon, the clones do begin to slowly fade away, which the scientists outside of this dream world or this vision lament as another failure. Inside Ambertwo's, as she names it, the Remember Place, Mewtwo looks around for the other clones and asks Ambertwo where they had gone. However, she also begins to fade away, which one of the scientists notes quietly. Fuji watches solemnly as the energy pulse in the tank begins to fade away. Mewtwo, worried, asks her what is happening, to which she replies that it feels like it's time to say goodbye. Mewtwo begins to cry at the loss of his friend, and Ambertwo assures him that it will be alright and thanks him for caring about her. She tells him he will live and that life is wonderful. However, Mewtwo calls out for Ambertwo in sadness and fear, which begins to manifest as a psychic emission and spike in brain activity. And as the alarm klaxons blare, Fuji orders his assistant to stabilize Mewtwo's powers by administering a memory-wiping serum. The serum almost fails to take effect, but gradually Mewtwo calms down and falls asleep. The team is relieved, and while Dr. Fuji is glad Mewtwo survived, he is outraged that his daughter is gone forever. But as you and I know, the tragedy doesn't stop there, and neither do the cloned Pokemon, because there was a far deeper meaning to all of this. Mewtwo slowly matures, and in its sleep, it states that it feels like it has been asleep for what seems like forever. It still has slight memories of Amber and ponders over her last words. Mewtwo's strike back continues from this point, and it was in the original untranslated script that we get a much deeper understanding of what Mewtwo's plans were. It wasn't actually trying to rule the world or be evil or anything. It was trying to find its place in our world as a clone. In fact, it was trying to find the place of all cloned Pokemon within our world. Through a post by GameSpot, actually, which led to accredited sources and translated blogs, I have the following. In a series of blogs, Takeshi Shudo, chief writer for the original series of the anime and the first movie, detailed his original plans for Pokemon the first movie. He wrote that prologue in order to make a film that not only entertained kids, but mentally stimulated their parents with some tough questions of existentialism. The conflict of his film came from Mewtwo's struggle to find meaning to its existence. This is far less ambition in the version of the movie localized for Western audiences, as in the original, there is no wanting to annihilate the world and rule it. All Mewtwo wants is to find answers to the questions regarding its identity, its purpose, and most of all, its value. Questions that we ask ourselves as we grow and mature through our own lives. And Mewtwo eventually decides the best way to do this, to find the answers to these questions, is by testing its power. If Mewtwo is stronger than the strongest Pokemon trainers, or even Mew, its creator, the thing that it was based off of, the thing that its DNA was constructed from, then surely its life has to have value. If Mewtwo's clone army can defeat natural-born Pokemon, then they must have a more valid reason to live than the originals, right? And while Mewtwo does mention that humans aren't fit to rule the world, when asked, he mentions that Pokemon aren't fit either. He's just trying to figure out his place, the only way he learned how to, in battle. 4Kids is infamous for heavily censoring the shows that they buy, removing things like guns, cigarettes, and religious symbols, and even changing Japanese food like rice balls for more recognizable American food like jelly donuts, you know, the legendary dub that we always hear. In the year between the Japanese and US releases of the movie, 4Kids' Norman Grossfield dramatically rewrote the script, incorporating all new story elements, according to the website. They also rescored the entire movie with music that Grossfield thought better reflected what American kids would respond to. These changes did not sit well with the writers and producers of the Japanese original picture. As written in an essay and quoted by Tobin in Pikachu's Global Adventure: The Rise and Fall of Pokemon, executive producer Masakazu Kubo wrote that the people at Warner gave us some hassle over the script. According to them, the Japanese original does not distinguish clearly enough between the good guys and the bad. According to Kubo, the distributor told him that the viewers would not be able to know who to identify with and who to cheer on. In other words, the heroes and villains needed to be identified clearly. And that is still one of the greatest, most horrible examples of, oh, we're gonna dumb things down and we're going to assume our entire audience is absolutely stupid and has no literacy of media whatsoever. And by dumbing it down, you ensure people will never gain that ability of media literacy, because not everything needs to be in black and white, and some of the greatest things in this world are in gray. Thank you, Pokemon Black and White, for having incredibly gray morals and lessons that happen within the game, for example. But it doesn't stop there. While the heartbreaking fight is going on, we cut to the human characters witnessing the carnage, and here's where the biggest and what some people describe as the worst change happens. In the US dub, which was then translated in all Western countries, the characters realize that violence is wrong and Pokemon should absolutely never fight one another, which is a very strange message to have in a movie based on a franchise where Pokemon fight each other, which through the games and through everything else, Pokemon have been shown, not all of them, to enjoy battling with each other, that they choose to be caught by their trainer, that they can escape their Pokeballs if they so wish, and the only times in which Pokemon don't do that is when they are being wrongfully treated, such as what we see in a number of the games or anime, as I have mentioned. Now, only this isn't the message of Shouto's original script, this whole idea of that they shouldn't fight each other, since the whole point of Mewtwo was that it wanted to find its place in the world, and the fighting was a way to show that the clones' lives had more value. The human character's moment of realization actually involves them talking about how both originals and the copies are still living creatures, and therefore their lives have value. All of their lives have equal value. And when Ash gets petrified and the Pokemon Tears bring him back, because yes, Pokemon Tears have the power to give life, essentially, both Mew and Mewtwo finally realize that all lives are meaningful, whether human, Pokemon, original, or lab grown. And the sheer power of this idea is beautiful. And even the two quotes we do know and love fit within that original idea perfectly. Don't allow yourself to become enraged. Instead, we can still enjoy what we grew up with and think about those memories and smile on them, while also becoming aware of the original intent, in which this is just genuinely phenomenal. This was a movie that contained a message that can transcend the art form in which it was created in, which is inspiring. And I know that kind of led off of the idea of, and this whole video kind of was all over the place in terms of like, well, regional variant or anime exclusive creatures, but I do hope that you enjoyed it, as that's everything. We've covered them all, at least all the ones that I was able to find. Some of them variant, some regional, some not, some just being different color dependence upon where they are, likely be, you know, in relation to the equator. And personally, I'm super interested in seeing if the Pokemon Company will ever bring some new Pokemon forms into existence inspired by these old works. Clones, artificial Pokemon, different patterns, a Crystal Onix. And if you want to hear more theories or deep dives on hidden or forgotten Pokemon media that are much longer than this one and still just as in-depth, I'd recommend my 4-part iceberg series or literally any other ecology video that exists on this channel, as it's always an absolute treasure and treat to dig into these and present it to you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I know this was a short video, but if you made it this far and aren't subscribed, I'd be a bit surprised. So please subscribe and tell me what you hope for with some of these anime-only Pokemon, some variants that you've seen from fan art that you really love, especially as comments, once again, help boost the video and a channel's reach. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can become a member for as little as $3 a month, which brings you perks such as the member shoutout, which we're going to go do right now. Thank you to all of our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Crow Fighters 14, Heals for Life, Biggs, Fatty, Knit, Buzz, and Summer, and then all our champions, Andrew Merchants, Coast, and Joshua Biggins Wilson, then the Knights of the Court, Moth Romance, Double Crumbo, Shiny Jazz, Zero, Briz Boys, Value Lemon, Fix My Nitrogen, Quill Fighters 14, Plow, Muse Art World, Annie Stone, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue Dalek, and Warren Hemphill, with all of the Wanderers to follow. J. Gill, Reckless, Cincinnati, Prime 90s, Nebula Games, Jenna M, none of your business, Ezra, Rowan Frady, Brock Baker, Zipping Pigeons 80, Abby Higgs, Adrian C.S., Amanda Mastacola. There's a lot of new names this time. Oh my goodness, flipping around. 3 Ronin, Space Lozzie, Sadler Rankin, Abdullah Aladi, Tamarkle, Gaming Ruins, Big Brick, Mace Breaker, Rainbow, Hungry Goat, Malachi Zalmaki, Malachi Zalmakai, Saffron Queen, Clark G.A., Zumir, Gaia, Joe Knows, Not That Important, Melly vs. the World, Xanathon, Anime King, Daniel Troops, Rick Rips, Michael Gibbons, Brian, Millie, Jers, Mr. Diagonal, Yips, 90707, Evil China, Ruby, Soft and Kai, Micah 626, Amy, Nicole Manassi, and Kristen, Sandwich Boss, Emmy, whatever this is, Venny Samoru, Max Supreme, Disporting Emperor, Michael Stein, Lola Family, Lost Wisteria, Manico, TH73, Spurgalicious, Cindy House, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Mad Sunheimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Out, Hussein Kassam, Rebecca Colahune, Jappy W, Memento, Modem, Corn, Marshy, Edward, Kosowski, Fedeka Fox, Doris, Squeeberg, Hag, Addy Cadabra, King, By, Jack of the Frost, Rex, Snivy, Addy Z, Jacob Square, DJ Monk 23, Goodwater, Rice Smith, Gamer, Bad Dragon, Just J, M, Star, S, MD, Horsewood Cocktail, Delumio, Gwendolyn, East Scander, 072, Andrew Frost, Anonymous, Summon Slaw, Doc Nguyen, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Corner of the Com, Unseelie King, Jojo, Thephornius Guest, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Rosef, Dylan Peters, Malachi Burkhardt, and Heather Wise. And thank you all being wanted members of the channel and supporting the channel. And goodness, if you want to hear your name at the end of every single video, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month. I'm going to tell you right now, next video that's coming out, I'm going to be working on the toxic ecology of the world. All the locations where we find Ghastly. I mean, I guess Ghastly works too, but wheezing and coughing, where Muck and Rattata, all these polluted places where they thrive the most and the best. And how does the ecology even work there? Because there is a very strong and very interesting ecology that works throughout all these areas that I've not even discussed in our normal ecology videos. So with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't think I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!